My mother didn't even look up from her plate when she said it. Some children are born to succeed. She took another bite before finishing the sentence. And some just spend their lives pretending they're trying. The room filled with quiet laughter. Not loud laughter. The kind families use when they've repeated the same joke for so many years that nobody questions whether it's cruel anymore. My father smiled into his coffee. My younger sister, Olivia, reached for another dinner roll without saying a word. Her husband, Ethan, lowered his eyes, pretending not to enjoy it. I sat there with my fork resting against my plate. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 36 years old. According to my family, I'm the failure. Not because I ever asked them for money. Not because I made reckless choices. Not because I'd been fired or divorced or addicted to anything. No. I was the failure because my life didn't look expensive. I drove an old pickup. I lived in a modest house on Maple Street. My clothes usually smelled faintly of sawdust. My hands carried tiny white scars from years of working with lumber and steel. To my mother, those things meant I had failed. Olivia, on the other hand, she had everything that looked successful. A beautiful husband, a massive new home, designer furniture, luxury vacations, perfect holiday photos. The kind of life my mother loved posting on social media with captions about hard work and God's blessings. Every Sunday dinner had become another celebration of Olivia's life, and another reminder of mine. Mom picked up her phone. Oh, everyone has to see this. She turned the screen toward the table. A picture of Olivia's new house filled the display. Stone exterior, black-framed windows, a wide front porch, perfect landscaping. It looked like something from a magazine. "Isn't it gorgeous?" Mom asked proudly. Dad nodded immediately. Ethan really knows how to provide. Olivia smiled. We finally finished decorating the upstairs. Mom zoomed in on another photo. The kitchen alone is bigger than Claire's entire living room. Everyone laughed again. Even Ethan. He gave me an apologetic smile afterward, but he still laughed. I forced a smile. It looks nice. Mom looked disappointed. Just nice? It is. She shook her head. You've never appreciated beautiful things. I almost answered. Instead, I picked up my glass of iced tea. Over the years, I'd learned something. People who have already decided who you are rarely hear anything you say afterward. So I stopped trying. Olivia leaned back comfortably. You should come over sometime. I'd love to show you the place. I will. You'll probably get some ideas. For my house? She nodded. You could fix yours up a little. Mom laughed again. Oh, honey. She reached over and patted my hand. Let's be realistic. Then she looked directly into my eyes. Claire will never own a home like yours. Nobody objected. Not one person. Dad quietly buttered another piece of bread. Olivia looked away. Ethan cleared his throat. Silence settled around the table. That silence hurt more than the sentence. Because silence is agreement. After a moment, Dad finally spoke. Your mother isn't trying to be mean. She's just telling the truth. There it was, the final vote, 3 against 1, again. I nodded once. I understand. Mom smiled. I only want what's best for you. I know. You've always been so stubborn. If you'd chosen a better career, she shrugged. Things might have been different. I didn't answer. Mostly because my career wasn't the problem. Their assumptions were. You see, my family thought I repaired old houses. That's what they told people. Claire fixes things. She's handy. She does little remodeling jobs. They'd been saying that for years. None of it was true. Not because I hid the truth, because nobody ever asked. The conversation drifted back to Olivia's house. Her custom staircase, imported lighting, the outdoor fireplace. Mom admired every picture like she was looking at a royal palace. I watched quietly. Then, one photograph stopped me. It wasn't the kitchen, or the living room. or the marble countertops. It was the second-floor balcony. Just one picture, barely on the screen for 3 seconds. But 3 seconds was enough. Something didn't look right. I couldn't explain it immediately. Only a feeling. A tiny shadow beneath one corner. A slight change in the roofline. Maybe nothing. Maybe the camera angle. Maybe. I looked closer. Before I could study it, Mom swiped to the next photo. And here's the master bathroom. Everyone admired another expensive room. Nobody noticed my silence. Nobody noticed I wasn't looking at the bathroom anymore. I was thinking about that balcony. Dinner finally ended almost 2 hours later. Mom hugged Olivia tightly. "I'm so proud of you." Dad shook Ethan's hand. "You've built a wonderful life." Then both of them looked at me. Not with anger, not with disappointment, with pity. Somehow, that felt worse. As I reached the front door, Mom called after me. "Oh, Claire?" I turned. She smiled kindly. The kind of smile people wear before saying something unforgettable. "I still pray you'll figure life out." "I will." "You know," she hesitated, "it's never too late to stop settling." I nodded politely. "Good night, Mom." Outside, the air felt cooler than usual. I climbed into my 12-year-old pickup. The driver's seat had a tear in the leather. The dashboard light flickered whenever the engine started. If my mother had seen it, she would have added it to the list of reasons I'd failed. The drive home took nearly 30 minutes. Maple Street sat on the older side of town. Small houses, large trees, quiet sidewalks. No gates, no fountains, no luxury cars. Just ordinary people living ordinary lives. I pulled into my driveway. My little white house looked exactly the same as it always had. Simple, clean, solid. No one from my family had ever stepped inside. Not once. Mom always had an excuse. Olivia was too busy. Dad said he'd visit next month. Next month never came. I unlocked the front door. The familiar smell of fresh pine greeted me. I smiled without realizing it. This house knew me better than my family did. Every floorboard beneath my feet, I'd installed. Every doorway, I'd framed. Every beam hidden behind these walls, I'd measured myself. Nothing inside this house existed by accident. I walked into the living room and placed my truck keys beside a large drafting table. Blueprints covered nearly every inch of it. Engineering notes, permit documents, structural drawings, inspection reports, a laptop displaying 3-dimensional building models. Most visitors would have thought they belonged to an architect. They didn't. They belonged to me. My phone vibrated. A message from Olivia. "I'm sorry about Mom. She doesn't realize how she sounds sometimes." I stared at the screen, then typed, "It's okay. Drive safe." I deleted the message, locked my phone, set it face down. Some things weren't worth explaining anymore. Instead, I walked back to the drafting table. Without thinking. I opened the photo Mom had sent to the family group chat. Olivia's new house. I zoomed in, closer, closer. The balcony. There it was again. That tiny line, almost invisible. Most people would never notice. Most contractors probably wouldn't either. But something about it bothered me. Not enough to accuse anyone. Not enough to draw conclusions. Just enough to ask one simple question. Why? I leaned closer to the screen. The room became completely silent. Outside. Rain began tapping softly against my windows. I didn't know it then. But that tiny detail in a single-family photograph was about to expose a truth far bigger than one beautiful house. And before it was over, someone wearing an official county badge would stand on Olivia's front porch with a clipboard in one hand. And my entire family would finally understand why they should have stopped calling me the failure. I barely slept that night. Not because my mother's words still hurt. Those stopped hurting years ago. What kept replaying in my mind was the photograph. That tiny shadow beneath the balcony. the slight dip along the roofline. The more I looked at it, the less it looked like a trick of the light. By 6 the next morning, I had already made coffee and spread the photo across my drafting table. Most people enlarge family pictures to admire smiles. I zoomed in on corners, connections, support points, weight lines. Buildings tell stories. You just have to know where to read them. I leaned closer. Come on, I whispered to myself. What are you trying to tell me? Nothing obvious, nothing dramatic, just several tiny details that didn't seem to belong together. One detail means nothing. 3 details become a pattern. I closed the laptop. There wasn't enough information. Not yet. By 7:30, I was driving toward my first project. My crew was restoring a 70-year-old public library after water damage had weakened part of its structure. When I arrived, 4 workers were already unloading equipment. Morning, Claire. Morning. Jake, my foreman, walked over carrying rolled-up blueprints. The city engineer wants your opinion before we remove the west wall. I'll take a look. Inside, sunlight poured through temporary plastic coverings where windows had been removed. The building smelled of old wood and fresh concrete. I loved that smell. To me, it smelled like second chances. Jake pointed toward a long crack running across one support wall. The engineer thinks it's foundation settlement. I crouched beside it, ran my fingertips lightly across the surface, then looked upward. No, Jake frowned. You sure? I nodded. The foundation isn't moving. What is? I stood. The roof is. Everyone looked up. The crack wasn't the problem. It was the symptom. Someone had overloaded the roof years earlier during a renovation. The weight had slowly transferred downward until the wall began telling the truth. Jake smiled. I still don't know how you see these things. I smiled back. I don't. I just listen longer. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Mom. I let it ring. A second later, Dad. I answered this time. Hi. His voice sounded hesitant. Your mother thinks you've been upset. I'm fine. You know how she is. I do. Silence. Then he quietly asked, You're still coming Saturday? The housewarming? Yes. I said I'd be there. Good. Another pause. Claire. Yeah? Just don't embarrass anyone. I stared through the library window. I've never embarrassed this family. He sighed. No. You've never tried. The call ended. I stood there looking at my phone for several seconds. Some people don't realize how much a single sentence can reveal. Dad hadn't asked me to enjoy the party. He hadn't asked me to forgive Mom. He'd asked me not to embarrass the family. Interesting. That afternoon, I drove across town to pick up engineered beams from a local supplier. The warehouse manager greeted me with a grin. Claire Bennett. Right on time. He handed me the paperwork. I've got those LVLs loaded. As I signed the delivery receipt, he asked, You heading over to Ridgeview after this? I looked up. Why? He shrugged. Saw Vaughn Development ordering replacement material this morning. Replacement? Yeah. They're sending a crew back to one of their finished houses. Finished houses rarely need structural replacement, especially within the first year. What kind of material? He glanced toward the loading dock. Steel hangers. Engineered headers. Extra joist hardware. That made me stop writing. Those weren't cosmetic materials. Those were structural. I kept my expression neutral. Probably just warranty work. Maybe. He shrugged again. But I've been selling building supplies for 23 years. Finished homes don't usually need that much warranty work. On the drive home, I took the longer route. The road passed directly through Ridgeview Estates. Rows of expensive homes stretched across freshly paved streets. Everything looked perfect. Fresh sod, young maple trees, stone mailboxes, luxury SUVs. Exactly the kind of neighborhood my mother loved talking about. Olivia's house sat near the end of the cul-de-sac. 3 contractor trucks were parked outside. Strange. The housewarming was only 3 days away. Why would construction crews still be working? I slowed without stopping. 2 workers carried long lumber through the front door. Another loaded demolition bags into a trailer. Demolition? On a brand new house? That wasn't normal. As I drove past, one of the workers glanced toward me. For just a second. Our eyes met. He looked exhausted. Not physically, mentally, like someone carrying a secret. I almost kept driving. Instead, I parked half a block away and walked over. The worker climbed down from the porch. "You need something?" "I'm looking for the superintendent." He left. "I'm Claire." He nodded politely. "Mike. You worked on this house?" "For a while." "For a while?" "I got moved." His answer was careful. Too careful. I looked toward the second-floor balcony. "Beautiful place." He followed my eyes. "Yeah." His voice lacked conviction. I smiled politely. "Busy week before the party?" "You could say that." "What are you replacing?" He hesitated, then looked back toward the house. "Nothing major." Before I could ask another question, another worker shouted from inside. "Mike!" He stepped backward. "Sorry. Gotta go." He disappeared through the front door. I remained standing on the sidewalk. Something wasn't right. Everyone I spoke to answered, without actually answering. That evening I returned home just before sunset. I carried the delivery paperwork inside and placed it beside my laptop. Then I opened the county's online property records, not because I suspected fraud, because I wanted facts. Every building leaves a paper trail: permits, inspections, engineering approvals, occupancy certificates. The records loaded slowly: address, builder, permit number. Everything looked ordinary. At first. Then I noticed something unusual. The framing inspection had been completed. The electrical inspection, completed. Plumbing, completed. Final occupancy, approved. I frowned. Something felt off. Not because anything was missing, because the dates were unusually close together, far closer than projects of that size normally moved. Maybe the contractor had simply worked faster than average. Maybe. I leaned back in my chair. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Rain began falling harder against the windows. I closed the laptop. There still wasn't enough evidence to reach a conclusion. Only questions. But questions have a way of leading somewhere, if you're patient enough to keep asking them. And for the first time since Sunday dinner, I wasn't thinking about my mother's insults anymore. I was thinking about Olivia. Because if the feeling in my gut was right, the biggest victim in this story might not be the person everyone kept calling the family failure. It might be the sister everyone believed had already won. By Thursday morning, I had convinced myself to let it go. Maybe the balcony was fine. Maybe the contractor trucks were there for cosmetic work. Maybe the inspection dates were unusual simply because the project had been well managed. Maybe. But experience had taught me something. When you find yourself using the word maybe too many times, you're usually trying to ignore something your instincts already understand. My work took me to the east side of town that morning. An insurance company had hired my team to inspect a farmhouse after a severe windstorm. The owners feared the roof had shifted. By 9 o'clock, I was standing in the attic with a flashlight. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight. Old timber creaked quietly beneath my boots. I moved slowly. Every few steps I stopped. Not because I was unsure, because buildings speak in tiny details. A nail pulling loose, a beam carrying too much weight, a joint beginning to separate. None of them scream. They whisper. And people who don't stop to listen usually hear the collapse instead. Jake climbed into the attic behind me. "What do you think?" I pointed my flashlight toward one corner. "See that?" He squinted. "The crack?" "No. The beam beside it." "It looks fine." "It isn't." He stepped closer. After several seconds, his expression changed. "I see it." A steel plate had been added years after the house was built. Someone had reinforced the wrong place. Not because they wanted to fix the problem, because they wanted to hide it. Jake shook his head. You always notice the repairs before you notice the damage. I smiled. Because repairs tell you what someone was afraid of. That sentence stayed with me all afternoon. Repairs tell you what someone was afraid of. By lunchtime, I found myself driving toward Ridgeview Estates again. I told myself it was coincidence. It wasn't. Something kept pulling me back. Olivia's neighborhood looked peaceful. Children rode bicycles. Neighbors watered flowers. Delivery trucks came and went. Everything looked exactly like the picture my mother loved showing people. Perfect. Too perfect. As I passed Olivia's street, I noticed another truck parked outside. No company logo, just plain white. Two men carried long cardboard boxes toward the garage. I slowed. One of them looked familiar. Gray beard, baseball cap, heavy work boots. Then I remembered. I'd seen him years earlier on a courthouse restoration project. His name was Frank, one of the best Finnish carpenters in the county. I parked farther down the street. Frank recognized me immediately. Claire? Frank. Haven't seen you in years. You working out here? He glanced toward Olivia's house before answering. For today? Just today? He nodded. Small job. What kind? He hesitated, then smiled politely. You know how it is. No. I really don't. Frank looked around carefully, almost as if he wanted to be sure nobody else could hear us. Finally, he leaned closer. You ever get asked to make something look finished, instead of making it right? His question caught me off guard. I don't take those jobs. I know. That's why I'm asking. Before I could respond, another worker opened the garage door. Frank! He straightened immediately. Gotta go. He started walking away, then stopped. Without turning around, he quietly said, Some houses photograph better than they live, and disappeared inside. I stood on the sidewalk for nearly a minute. His words echoed inside my head. Some houses photograph better than they live. That wasn't something a carpenter says casually, especially not Frank. He had spent 40 years protecting his reputation. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't a gossip. If he hinted at something, it usually mattered. That evening, I couldn't concentrate on anything else. Instead of making dinner, I carried my laptop onto the back porch. The rain from yesterday had cleared. A cool breeze moved through the maple trees. I opened Olivia's photographs again. This time, I ignored the balcony. Instead, I studied everything around it. Roof flashing, window spacing, drainage, support columns. One picture caught my attention. It had been taken during sunset. Most people would have admired the colors. I noticed the shadows. The shadow beneath the porch roof wasn't straight. One support column appeared to be carrying more weight than the others. Not much. Just enough to make me uncomfortable. I leaned closer, then stopped. A memory surfaced. Nearly 5 years earlier, I had inspected another luxury home after homeowners complained about doors refusing to close. Everyone blamed humidity. It wasn't humidity. One improperly sized support beam had slowly transferred weight across the second floor. The repairs had cost nearly $300,000. And from the street, that house had looked absolutely perfect. My phone buzzed. Olivia, I answered. Hey. Her voice sounded unusually quiet. Are you busy? Not really. I wanted to ask you something. Go ahead. She hesitated. Do houses settle a lot during the first year? My heart skipped. Why? Oh. She laughed nervously. Nothing serious. Just a couple of doors upstairs stick sometimes. Anything else? Another pause. I've noticed one little crack over the guest bedroom. She tried to sound casual. It probably happens in every new house. What did Ethan say? He told me not to worry. And the builder? He said new homes always settle. That was true, to a point. Every structure settles. The question is, how much? Claire? I'm here. You think I should worry? I looked toward the blueprint spread across my table. I think. I chose my words carefully. If something keeps changing instead of staying the same, it deserves another look. She laughed softly. You always answer like an engineer. I'll take that as a compliment. Before hanging up, she said something that stayed with me. You know, I wish Mom understood you the way you understand buildings. The line went silent. I sat there for several seconds after the call ended. It was the first genuine thing Olivia had said to me in years. The following morning, I arrived at my office before anyone else, coffee in one hand, notebook in the other. I drew 2 columns, facts, assumptions. Under facts I wrote, balcony appears uneven, structural material delivered after completion, contractor crews returned before housewarming, carpenter's warning, doors beginning to stick, crack above guest bedroom. Under assumptions, I wrote nothing, not one word, because assumptions solve nothing. Evidence does. I closed the notebook. Outside my office window, the sun was rising. Across town. My mother was probably telling another friend how proud she was of Olivia's beautiful new home. She had no idea that the house everyone admired was slowly becoming the only thing I couldn't stop thinking about. And somewhere inside that beautiful home, a truth was beginning to shift, just enough for someone who knew where to look. Saturday's housewarming was only 2 days away. Normally, I would have forgotten about the photographs by now, ignored the uneasy feeling, focused on work. Instead, I found myself thinking about Olivia's house every time I looked at another building. That wasn't like me. I never chased suspicions. I chased facts. Friday morning began with rain, the kind that settles in quietly and refuses to leave. By 8 o'clock, I was sitting in my office reviewing project schedules when Jake knocked on my door. You've got a visitor. I looked up. An older woman stood in the hallway wearing muddy work boots and a faded denim jacket. I recognized her immediately. Linda? She smiled. It's been a while. Linda Harper had spent nearly 30 years inspecting foundations for engineering firms before retiring. She had trained half the inspectors in the county, including me. Coffee? I asked. If it's strong. It always is. A few minutes later, we sat across from each other. She slid a folder across my desk. I found something that reminded me of you. Inside were photographs from a structural failure she'd investigated years earlier. Luxury home, stone exterior, beautiful landscaping, perfect from the street, rotting from the inside. The owners never saw it coming, she said. They trusted appearances. I nodded quietly. Linda studied my face. Something's bothering you. I'm not sure. You've never been wrong about that feeling. I looked toward the rain-covered window. How do you know when a concern becomes an investigation? She smiled. The moment you stop trying to prove yourself right and start trying to prove yourself wrong. That sentence stayed with me long after she left. That afternoon, I drove to the county building, not because I believed anyone had committed fraud, because public records exist for a reason. The records office occupied the 2nd floor. A young clerk greeted me. Can I help you? I'm looking for permit files. She handed me a request form. Address? I wrote, 214 Ridgeview Court, Olivia's address. The clerk disappeared into the archive room. 5 minutes later, she returned carrying a thin file, thinner than I expected. I thanked her and sat near one of the windows. The permit looked normal. So did the occupancy certificate, electrical approval, plumbing approval. Everything appeared complete. I kept reading. Builders leave fingerprints, not literal ones. Patterns, signatures, timing. Something eventually stood out. The framing inspection occurred on a Tuesday morning. The insulation inspection. Less than 24 hours later. Possible, but unusually fast. The drywall inspection happened the very next afternoon. Again, possible. Then came final occupancy, only 3 business days later. I leaned back. Large custom homes rarely moved that quickly. Not impossible. Just Unusual. I wrote the dates in my notebook. Nothing more. Facts. No assumptions. Exactly as I'd promised myself. As I stood to leave, an older employee organizing files nearby glanced toward my notebook. You in construction? I am, he smiled. Haven't seen you before. I don't come here often. He nodded. Most contractors don't. I hesitated before asking, busy year? He laughed. Busier than I'd like. New developments? Especially Ridgeview. That caught my attention. Growing fast? Too fast. He shrugged. Paperwork never seems to catch up. What do you mean? Oh, he waved dismissively. Nothing serious. We've just had more corrections than usual. Corrections, not violations. Corrections. There was an important difference. I thanked him and left, but another question had quietly taken shape. Why did one development require so many corrections? On my way back to the truck, my phone rang. Mom, I answered. Hello? There you are? You disappeared after dinner. I had work. You always have work. I do. She sighed dramatically. Listen carefully. This housewarming is important. I know. I don't want any negativity. I wasn't planning any. Good. Then she laughed softly. You know your sister worries too much. Worries? She thinks every little crack means the house is falling down. I stopped walking. She mentioned cracks? Oh, tiny ones. Mom dismissed them with a laugh. Every new house has them. What exactly did she say? I don't remember. But honestly, Claire, you spend your whole life fixing old buildings. Try not to scare her with stories. I won't. She sounded relieved. I knew I could count on you. The call ended. I stood beside my truck, staring at the rain running across the windshield. Olivia had spoken to Mom, which meant she was worried enough to ask, but apparently not worried enough to ask the right people. That evening, I decided to drive home using the road that overlooked Ridgeview Estates. The rain had finally stopped. Golden sunlight broke through the clouds. As I reached the hill, I could see dozens of rooftops below. One roof caught my attention immediately. Olivia's. Something silver reflected near the rear slope. I pulled onto the shoulder. Construction tarp. Fresh. Someone had covered part of the roof. On a house less than a year old. That wasn't impossible. Storm damage happened. But there hadn't been a storm. Not one strong enough. I watched quietly. A pickup truck pulled away from the driveway. No company logo. No advertising. Just plain white. Again. The second plain truck I'd seen that week. No reputable builder hides free advertising. Unless they don't want attention. Back home, I spread everything across my dining table. Permit dates, photographs, notes, phone conversations, delivery records. Not because I believed I had solved anything, because patterns become clearer when facts sit beside one another. I stared at the page for a long time, then drew one line across the bottom. What am I missing? The question stayed unanswered, until my laptop chimed. A new email. Subject, warranty extension notice. It had been forwarded accidentally from one of my suppliers. Inside was a bulk notification sent to several contractors. One line immediately caught my eye. Structural hardware replacement requested for Phase 3 developments. Phase 3, Ridgeview Estates. I reread the sentence twice. Structural hardware, not paint, not flooring, not cabinets. Structural. The email didn't mention Olivia's house specifically, but it mentioned the same neighborhood, the same phase, the same week. I slowly closed the laptop. Outside, darkness settled over Maple Street. Tomorrow was the housewarming. By tomorrow afternoon, my entire family would be celebrating what they believed was the greatest success among us. And for the first time, I wasn't wondering whether something was wrong anymore. I was wondering how many people already knew. Saturday arrived warm and cloudless, the kind of day people choose for celebrations. Blue skies, fresh-cut lawns, neighbors walking their dogs. Everything looked peaceful. If someone had driven through Ridgeview Estates that afternoon, they would have seen balloons tied to mailboxes, luxury cars lining the streets, and families carrying wrapped gifts toward Olivia's beautiful new home. No one would have guessed that beneath all those smiles, something was quietly beginning to come apart. I parked my old pickup 3 houses away, not because there wasn't room in the driveway, because I knew my truck would become another topic of conversation. I grabbed the small gift I'd brought, a handcrafted walnut serving board I'd made in my own workshop, and walked toward the house. Before I reached the front door, I heard my mother's voice. "There she is!" Every head turned. Mom smiled brightly, but I knew that smile. It wasn't excitement. It was inspection. She looked at my jeans, my boots, my truck parked down the street. Then she glanced toward the guests standing nearby. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten." I said I'd come. She kissed my cheek. "You could have dressed up a little." I smiled politely. I thought today was about Olivia. For a second, Mom didn't know how to answer. Then she laughed. Always so practical. The house was beautiful. Natural light filled every room. The hardwood floors gleamed. The stone fireplace stretched nearly 20 feet to the ceiling. Guests admired every detail. I've never seen a kitchen this gorgeous. Look at those cabinets. The staircase is incredible. Olivia smiled graciously as she thanked everyone. She looked happy, but not relaxed. Every few minutes, her eyes drifted upstairs, almost unconsciously, as if she were listening for something no one else could hear. Ethan stood near the dining room answering questions about the house. One guest asked, "How long did construction take?" "About 11 months. "Everything goes smoothly?" Ethan laughed. "As smooth as construction ever gets." The answer sounded rehearsed, short, careful. Before anyone could ask another question, he changed the subject. "So who's ready to see the backyard?" Interesting. I wandered through the house slowly, not inspecting, observing. There's a difference. A guest notices decorations. Someone like me notices how a building breathes. The floors felt level. The windows opened smoothly. Nothing obvious. Nothing alarming. Then, as I climbed halfway up the staircase, I heard it. A faint click. Almost like dry wood settling. Most people ignored sounds like that. I stopped walking. Another click. Very soft. Coming from somewhere above the landing. A child ran past me laughing. His footsteps echoed through the second floor. The sound disappeared. Maybe normal. Maybe not. "Claire!" I turned. Olivia stood at the top of the stairs. "You made it." I wouldn't miss it. She hugged me. As she stepped back, she lowered her voice. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." She looked around to make sure no one was listening. "Do you have a minute?" "Lead the way." She took me into the guest bedroom and quietly closed the door. The cheerful smile she'd worn downstairs disappeared instantly. "I think something's wrong." I didn't answer. I simply waited. She walked toward the wall beside the window. There. A hairline crack stretched diagonally from the top corner of the window trim. Small, maybe 6 inches long. "When did you first notice it?" 3 weeks ago. "And now?" She pointed lower. "It keeps getting longer." I crouched beside the baseboard. Tiny gap, less than a 1/4 inch. Again. Not proof of anything. Just another fact. "Have you shown Ethan?" "Yes." "What did he say?" "He said every house settles." "And the builder?" "They told us to repaint it if it bothered us." I slowly stood. "Has anything else changed?" She hesitated. "The upstairs doors don't close unless we push them." "When did that start?" "A month ago." "Anything outside?" She looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Balcony?" She blinked. "What about it?" "Nothing. Just asking." Before we could continue, Mom opened the bedroom door without knocking. "There you two are." She looked at the crack, then at me. I knew it. Knew what? You've got Olivia worried. I haven't said anything. Mom folded her arms. I told her not to overreact. It's a brand new house. Every building has tiny cracks. I nodded. They do. She looked satisfied. See? You agree with me. I said every building has cracks. I didn't say every crack means the same thing. The room became very quiet. Mom frowned. Honestly, Claire, you always have to complicate things. I wasn't trying to. She sighed dramatically. I swear. You always find problems. Before I could answer, Olivia quietly interrupted. Mom. I asked Claire. She didn't bring it up. Mom looked surprised, then slightly embarrassed, only for a moment. Fine, she forced another smile. Everyone's waiting downstairs. As she left, I noticed Olivia watching the crack again, not because of what I'd said, because she'd already been worried before I arrived. Back in the living room, guests gathered around the dining table. Champagne glasses clinked together. Dad raised his glass. I'd like to make a toast. Everyone grew quiet. He smiled proudly at Olivia and Ethan. You've built something wonderful. He looked around the room. This house represents hard work, discipline, and success. Applause filled the room. Then he looked toward me. Not intentionally, just long enough. Long enough for everyone else to notice. Mom placed a hand on his arm. We're proud of both our daughters. She paused. In different ways. Several guests nodded politely. I smiled. The words didn't sting anymore, because people can only define your worth if you let them. As the afternoon continued, conversations drifted into smaller groups. I stepped outside onto the back patio for some fresh air. From there, I could see the second-floor balcony above me. The afternoon sunlight hit the railing perfectly. I narrowed my eyes. There it was again. That slight downward line, barely noticeable. Someone standing beneath it would never see it. But from this angle, it was there. A quiet voice interrupted my thoughts. You noticed it too. I turned. An older man stood beside me holding a paper cup of coffee. Gray hair, calm eyes, work boots that had seen decades of construction. I don't think we've met, I said. He extended his hand. Robert, you know Ethan? I used to. Past tense. I retired last year. What did you do? Building inspector. That caught my attention. County inspectors rarely attended private parties, unless they knew the family. Robert looked toward the balcony again. You work in construction? I do. He nodded slowly. I thought so. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he asked quietly, Ever get the feeling a building wants someone to ask the right question? I looked at him carefully. Sometimes. He took one slow sip of coffee, then said something that made every instinct inside me come alive. I've been wondering, who signed off on this house? Before I could ask what he meant, the front doorbell rang. One sharp chime echoed through the entire house. A second later, another. Guests turned toward the foyer. Ethan frowned. I've got it. He opened the front door. His confident smile disappeared. Standing on the porch were two people wearing county identification badges. One of them held a clipboard. The other carried a thick inspection file. The older woman spoke calmly. Good afternoon. We're looking for the owner of the property. The room fell completely silent. And for the very first time, I saw genuine fear appear on Ethan's face. The room went silent. Not the polite silence that follows a speech, the kind that arrives when everyone realizes something is wrong. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway. The smile he'd been wearing all afternoon disappeared. One of the county officials held up an identification badge. Mr. Ethan Collins? Yes. We need to speak with the homeowner regarding this property. Olivia stepped forward beside her husband. I'm Olivia Collins. Is something wrong? The woman offered a reassuring smile. Nothing has been concluded, Mrs. Collins. We're here to verify information concerning your home's structural file. Murmurs spread through the guests. My mother immediately laughed. Oh, goodness. There must be some paperwork mistake. Dad nodded confidently. These things happen. The official remained calm. Perhaps. That's exactly what we're here to determine. Ethan forced a smile. Of course. If this is about permits, my builder handled everything. We understand. The younger inspector opened a thick folder. We only need a few minutes. My mother stepped closer. I'm sure this can wait until Monday. The inspector looked at her politely. I'm sorry, ma'am. It can't. The confidence slowly disappeared from Ethan's face. Guests quietly stepped away from the foyer. Nobody wanted to interrupt. But nobody wanted to leave either. Human curiosity is stronger than good manners. I stayed where I was. Not because I wanted answers. Because I wanted facts. There is a difference. The lead inspector looked toward Olivia. Have you noticed any recent structural changes? Olivia hesitated. She looked at Ethan, then back at the inspector. A few. What kind? The upstairs doors don't close properly. A crack appeared above the guest bedroom. And... She paused. I thought the balcony looked a little different. Ethan interrupted immediately. Every new house settles. The inspector nodded. Sometimes. He wrote something on his clipboard. Sometimes it doesn't. Mom folded her arms. I think everyone is overreacting. She looked directly at me. Claire already scared Olivia into worrying. Several guests glanced toward me. I answered calmly. I never told Olivia there was a problem. Olivia spoke before anyone else could. That's true. I asked Claire. Mom looked surprised. But Claire didn't even inspect anything. No, Olivia admitted quietly. She only asked questions. The older inspector slowly looked around the entryway. Then his eyes settled on me. You work in construction? I do. What field? Structural restoration. He nodded thoughtfully. I thought so. How? You've been looking at the building instead of the people ever since we arrived. A few guests turned toward me. For the first time that afternoon, nobody looked at me like the family failure. They looked curious. The inspector turned back toward Ethan. We'd like access to the second floor. Now? If possible. Ethan hesitated, only for a second, then smiled again. Of course. Please. The group headed upstairs. Most of the guests stayed below. A few quietly followed, including me. The guest bedroom looked exactly as it had an hour earlier. The inspector examined the crack without saying a word. He placed a small measuring gauge against the drywall, recorded the width, then moved to the hallway. Next, the master bedroom. Another crack. Smaller, barely visible. He measured that one too. The younger inspector checked every door. Bedroom 1, bedroom 2, bathroom, closet. One by one. Each door rubbed slightly against the frame. Nothing dramatic. Just consistent. The older inspector wrote another note. Still. He said nothing. My mother whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. I still don't see the problem. The inspector smiled politely. Neither do we. Not yet. That answer made the hallway even quieter. We stepped outside onto the second-floor balcony. A gentle breeze moved across the neighborhood. Children laughed somewhere down the street. Everything looked peaceful. The inspector knelt beside one support post. He placed a small digital level on the railing, waited, watched, then checked it again. Without changing his expression, he handed the tool to the younger inspector. The younger man frowned slightly, then quietly nodded. Neither of them spoke. Professionals rarely rush conclusions. Ethan cleared his throat. Can someone tell me what's happening? The lead inspector stood. We received information requiring verification. What information? I'm not prepared to discuss that until our inspection is complete. But this is my house, and we'll explain everything. When we're finished, Olivia slowly looked toward me. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You saw something, I answered honestly. I saw questions, not answers. She nodded slowly, almost relieved. The inspection continued downstairs. Garage, utility room, mechanical closet, foundation access. Everywhere they went, they photographed, measured, documented, never speculated, never accused, just facts. Exactly the way inspections should happen. Nearly 40 minutes passed. Guests no longer talked about the kitchen, or the decorations, or the beautiful neighborhood. They watched two inspectors quietly moving through the house with cameras and measuring tools. The celebration had disappeared, replaced by uncertainty. Finally, everyone gathered again in the living room. The lead inspector closed his notebook. Mr. and Mrs. Collins, at this time we are not declaring the structure unsafe. Ethan immediately relaxed. I knew it. The inspector continued. However, the room became silent again. We have identified several conditions requiring additional engineering review. Ethan's smile faded. What does that mean? It means we cannot determine the cause today. So we're fine? We did not say that. What we said is, the property requires an independent structural evaluation before any final conclusions are made. Mom laughed nervously. So that's all? No. The inspector removed a document from his folder. This is an official notice of further investigation. He handed it to Ethan. You'll be contacted within the next few business days. Ethan stared at the paper. What started this investigation? The inspector met his eyes. We're not authorized to discuss the source. But I can tell you this, he paused. It began with information we considered credible enough to verify. As the inspectors prepared to leave, the older man stopped beside me. Quietly, so no one else could hear, he said, You asked the right questions. I frowned. I didn't file a complaint. I know. He gave a small smile. Sometimes, the truth arrives before anyone invites it. Then he walked toward the front door. The county vehicles pulled away. No sirens, no drama, just two ordinary cars disappearing down a quiet suburban street. But the silence they left behind felt louder than anything that had happened all afternoon. Inside the house, nobody reached for another drink. Nobody admired the expensive kitchen anymore. Nobody talked about success. For the first time in years, my family wasn't looking at Olivia's beautiful home. They were wondering what might be hidden inside it. And standing near the staircase, Ethan unfolded the notice one more time. As he read the final paragraph, the color slowly drained from his face. No one left. Even after the county vehicles disappeared around the corner, the music had stopped. Half-finished drinks sat untouched on the kitchen island. The housewarming had quietly become something else. People weren't celebrating anymore. They were waiting. Ethan folded the official notice and slipped it into his jacket pocket. His smile returned. Forced. Everyone. He clapped his hands once. I think we've had enough excitement for one afternoon. A few guests laughed politely. Nobody sounded convinced. The county has procedures, Ethan continued. This is just another one. Dad nodded immediately. Exactly. I'm sure it'll all be sorted out. Mom looked around the room. You all know how government offices are. They make everything complicated. Several guests murmured in agreement. Olivia didn't. She stood beside the staircase, staring at the second floor. Her expression had changed. For the first time since buying the house, she wasn't looking at it with pride. She was looking at it with doubt. An hour later, the last guests began leaving. Mom hugged Olivia tightly. Don't let this ruin your day. It won't. It better not. She glanced toward me. And please, she lowered her voice, don't fill her head with worst-case scenarios. I won't. I mean it, Claire. I do too. I picked up my empty gift bag and headed toward the front door. Before I could leave, Olivia quietly called my name. Can you stay? I looked at Ethan. He gave a reluctant nod. Sure. Within 10 minutes. The house was quiet. Only the four of us remained. Olivia, Ethan, Dad, me. Mom had already gone home. Olivia placed the inspection notice on the dining table. I want someone to explain this. Ethan sighed. It says exactly what they told us. No. She pointed to the final paragraph. What does this mean? He looked away. I don't know. Dad adjusted his glasses. Independent structural evaluation required. He frowned. What's an independent evaluation? Before Ethan could answer, Olivia looked at me. Claire? I hesitated. It means another engineer, not connected to the builder, examines the structure. Why independent? So there's no conflict of interest. Silence. Ethan crossed his arms. That doesn't mean there's a problem. No, I answered honestly. It doesn't. It means they want confirmation. Confirmation of what? I don't know yet. That answer frustrated him. You always talk like that. Because guessing helps no one. Olivia slowly sat down. I've barely slept this week. Both Ethan and I looked at her. She took a deep breath. I didn't tell anyone because I thought I was imagining things. She looked toward the ceiling. Sometimes. I hear little popping sounds upstairs. Ethan immediately answered. Temperature changes. She nodded. I know. But they've been happening more often. She looked at me. The crack in the guest room has gotten longer. And yesterday, she swallowed. The balcony door wouldn't close. The room became completely silent. Dad finally spoke. Why didn't you tell us? She looked down. Because everyone kept telling me new houses settle. I walked toward the guest bedroom again, not to inspect, to observe. The crack was still there. I crouched beside the window. Something caught my attention. A pencil mark. Tiny. Hidden behind the curtain. Someone had marked the end of the crack, then dated it. June 12th. A second mark sat almost an inch farther away. June 27th. My stomach tightened. Olivia. She stepped into the room. Did you make these marks? She nodded nervously. I wanted to see if it was growing. Has it? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The marks answered for her. Downstairs. Ethan answered a phone call. His expression changed almost immediately. What? Pause. No. Another pause. When? His face lost color. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He ended the call. Olivia looked at him. What happened? He hesitated. It was Mark, the project manager. And? He said. He stopped. He said another homeowner in Ridgeview reported movement around a second-floor balcony. Nobody spoke. Dad frowned. Another house? Ethan nodded slowly. Apparently. I didn't say anything. One house could be coincidence. Two houses deserved attention. Ethan grabbed his truck keys. I have to go. Olivia stood. I'm coming. No. I said I'm coming. He sighed. Fine. They both left. Dad remained in the living room. Quiet. After several minutes, he looked toward me. I owe you an apology. I blinked. For what? I've spent years believing you didn't accomplish much. He looked around Olivia's house. I never actually knew what you did. I smiled gently. You never asked. His shoulders dropped. No. I didn't. The drive home felt unusually long. Rain clouds gathered again over Maple Street. As soon as I walked inside, my phone rang. Jake. You sitting down? No. You should. What happened? Our supplier just called. So? They're looking for emergency structural hardware. For Ridgeview? Yeah. Apparently several homes are requesting the exact same components. Not one. Several. I stared out the kitchen window. How many? I don't know. But enough for the supplier to notice. After ending the call, I opened my laptop. A local contractor's bulletin had just been updated. One short notice appeared at the top. Temporary engineering consultations available for Ridgeview Estates homeowners. No details. No explanation. Just that. I leaned back slowly. Whatever was happening, it was no longer limited to Olivia's house. The next morning, just after 8, my phone rang again. This time, it was an unfamiliar number. Claire Bennett? Speaking. My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm a licensed structural engineer. The county gave me your name. I frowned. My name? Yes. They said you've worked several restoration cases involving concealed framing failures. That's correct. He paused. I've just been assigned the engineering review for one of the homes in Ridgeview Estates. I looked toward the stack of photographs still lying on my table. And? Another brief silence. Then he quietly said the words that changed everything. I haven't inspected the house yet. But before I do, I need to ask you why you noticed the balcony before anyone else. The investigation had just become something much bigger than a single family dispute. For the first time, someone wasn't asking whether I was a failure. They were asking for my professional judgment, and I had a feeling the answer would change far more than my family's opinion of me. Monday morning arrived with a steady rain. At exactly 8:07 a.m., my phone rang. Daniel Brooks, the structural engineer. Good morning, Claire. Morning. I've just arrived at Ridgeview. So have I. He sounded surprised. You weren't invited. I know. I came because Olivia asked me. There was a brief pause. Good. I'd rather have another professional here. The county had placed temporary safety tape around a section of the driveway. Nothing dramatic, no flashing lights, no television cameras, just 2 county vehicles, Daniel's engineering truck, and a pickup belonging to Vaughn Development. Ethan stood near the garage, speaking angrily into his phone. His project manager, Mark, paced back and forth, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Olivia walked toward me the moment I stepped out of my truck. She looked exhausted. Dark circles framed her eyes. I didn't sleep. I know. How? You've apologized 3 times before saying hello. She managed the smallest smile. I guess I have. Then her expression became serious again. Claire. I'm scared. I gently squeezed her shoulder. That's why we're here. To find facts. Not fears. Daniel unfolded a large set of architectural drawings across the hood of his truck. I've compared the approved plans with the permit file. And? There are a few measurements I want to verify. He looked toward me. You mind walking with me? Of course. Ethan immediately interrupted. I don't understand why she's involved. Daniel answered before I could. Because she's spent most of her career diagnosing structural failures. I'm leading the investigation. I choose who's present. For the first time, Ethan had no response. The inspection began outside. Daniel measured the height of each support column beneath the balcony, then the spacing, then the angle. Everything was recorded, photographed, documented. No assumptions, just evidence. After nearly 20 minutes, Daniel frowned. Interesting. What? The left support is carrying more load than it should. How much? I'm not ready to estimate. But enough that I want to look inside. The builder's project manager stepped forward. There's really no reason to start opening walls. Daniel calmly held up the county authorization. There is now. Silence. Everyone moved into the living room. Protective floor coverings were rolled across the hardwood. One technician scanned the wall with a thermal imaging camera. Another used an electronic stud locator. Daniel marked 3 small blue X's on the drywall. He looked at me. If the approved plans are correct, what should be here? I studied the drawings. A double-engineered beam. And if it isn't? The load transfers somewhere else. He nodded slowly. Exactly. The technician carefully cut a square opening between 2 studs. Nobody spoke. The drywall panel came away. A flashlight illuminated the framing inside. Daniel leaned forward. His expression changed instantly. He didn't say a word. He simply handed me the flashlight. I looked inside, then looked again. The beam was there. But it wasn't the beam shown on the approved drawings. Someone had substituted a smaller member. Not visibly, not obviously, but enough to change how the second floor carried weight. Daniel quietly asked, "You're seeing the same thing I am?" "Yes." Olivia looked from one of us to the other. "What is it?" Daniel turned toward her. "The framing installed inside this wall does not match the approved structural plans." The room fell completely silent. Ethan immediately shook his head. "That's impossible." "The house passed inspection." Daniel remained calm. "I'm telling you what is physically inside your wall. Nothing more. Nothing less." Mark, the project manager, slowly lowered his head. Nobody missed it. Daniel requested a second opening near the balcony connection. Another careful cut. Another flashlight. Another long silence. This time, the younger county inspector quietly muttered, "Well, I wasn't expecting that." Daniel exhaled slowly. Neither man looked surprised anymore. They looked disappointed. Olivia's voice trembled. "Please. Just tell me." Daniel faced her. "The balcony is being supported differently than these approved engineering drawings specify. Can it be repaired?" "We don't know yet." "Is it dangerous?" He chose his words carefully. "I don't have enough information to answer that. But until we finish our evaluation, I recommend nobody use the balcony." Olivia closed her eyes. It was the first time she truly understood this wasn't about cosmetic cracks. My mother arrived almost 30 minutes later. She climbed out of her car smiling. "I brought coffee for everyone." The smile disappeared the moment she walked through the front door. The living room floor was covered with protective sheets. 2 walls had inspection openings. Engineers photographed exposed framing. County officials wrote notes. She looked at me. "What happened?" Before I could answer, Daniel spoke. "We're conducting an engineering evaluation." Mom turned to Ethan. "Tell me this is ridiculous." He couldn't. She slowly walked toward the exposed wall. "I don't understand." "It looked perfect," I answered quietly. "Most structural problems do." She looked at me differently than she ever had before. Not with pity, not with disappointment, not even with anger. For the first time in my life, she looked uncertain. Late that afternoon, Daniel gathered everyone in the dining room. "I want to be very clear." He placed several photographs beside the architectural drawings. "We have not determined intent. We have not assigned responsibility. And we have not completed our investigation." Everyone listened. "But we have confirmed one important fact." He tapped the photographs. "The structural framing inside this home does not completely match the approved engineering documents submitted for construction." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Daniel looked directly at Ethan. "I need the complete construction file. Every subcontractor invoice. Every framing revision. Every inspection report. Nothing omitted." Ethan swallowed hard. I'll have to call my office." Daniel nodded once. "Please do." As Ethan reached for his phone, it slipped from his hand and struck the hardwood floor with a sharp crack. The screen lit up. A new message appeared before anyone could look away. "Mark, don't give them the revised framing packet until we talk." No one said a word, but everyone in the room had seen it. And for the first time since this began, The investigation was no longer centered on a house. It was centered on people. Nobody spoke. The message on Ethan's phone stayed on the screen for only a few seconds. But a few seconds was enough. Daniel looked at Ethan, calmly. "I'll need to see that message." Ethan picked up his phone so quickly it almost slipped from his hands again. It's nothing." Daniel didn't argue. He simply replied, "If it relates to the construction of this property, it becomes part of the investigation." The room fell silent once more. Olivia looked at her husband. "What revised framing packet?" Ethan didn't answer. She stepped closer. "Ethan? What is he talking about?" "I don't know." "You don't know? Or you don't want to tell me?" He rubbed his forehead. "It's probably an older revision. Mark worries too much." Daniel quietly closed the engineering drawings. "I've been doing this for 26 years. I've heard that sentence before, and it has never ended well." The county inspector requested everyone except the homeowners and engineering team to step outside. Mom immediately protested. "This is family." Daniel nodded respectfully. "And I understand that. But this is now an official engineering review. We need room to work." Dad gently touched Mom's shoulder. "Let's go." For once, she didn't argue. As we walked onto the front lawn, neighbors had already begun gathering across the street, not to gossip, to understand why county vehicles were parked outside one of the newest homes in Ridgeview. My mother stared at the house she'd proudly shown everyone only days earlier. It suddenly looked different. Not because the bricks had changed, because certainty had. An hour later, Daniel stepped outside. He carried a thick folder under one arm. His expression remained professional. "We're finished for today." Mom hurried toward him. "Is the house safe?" Daniel answered carefully. "I'm not declaring it unsafe. But I'm also not clearing it. There are still documents we haven't received." "What kind of documents?" "The complete construction history." He looked toward Ethan, who had just walked outside. "I've requested every revision made during construction. Original plans. Updated plans. Material orders. Inspection corrections. And communication between the builder and subcontractors." Ethan nodded silently. "I'll provide everything." That evening, Olivia called me. I could hear boxes being moved in the background. "What are you doing?" "I'm packing." "You don't have to move out." "I know. But until I know what's happening, I don't want Emma sleeping upstairs." Emma, their 6-year-old daughter. She had spent every night in the bedroom directly beside the balcony. "I understand." Olivia's voice cracked. "I feel stupid." "No. You trusted professionals. I ignored the signs. You asked questions. That's exactly what you were supposed to do." There was a long silence. Finally, she whispered, "Mom keeps blaming you." I wasn't surprised. "What is she saying?" "She thinks your questions caused all this." I smiled sadly. Questions don't create problems. They reveal them. The next morning, I arrived at my office before sunrise. Jake was already waiting. "You've seen the news?" "What news?" He handed me his tablet. A local business journal had published a short article. "County engineers reviewing multiple homes in Ridgeview development. No accusations, no names, just confirmation that additional engineering evaluations had been ordered in several properties." "So it isn't just Olivia's house." Jake shook his head. "Looks that way." Around noon, my office phone rang. "Claire Bennett?" "Yes. This is Susan Reed. I'm legal counsel for Vaughn Development." I leaned back in my chair. "What can I do for you?" "We understand you've been present during the county's review." "I was invited by the homeowner." "Of course." Her voice remained polite. "We'd appreciate it if you avoided making public statements until the investigation is complete." "I haven't made any. And I don't intend to." "Good." She paused. Professional reputations matter. So do facts. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then she quietly replied, I suppose they do. Late that afternoon, Daniel called. I've received the construction file. And? It raises more questions than answers. What kind of questions? There are 3 different framing schedules. 3? Yes. The approved engineering drawings, the contractor's revision, and the material delivery records. They don't completely agree. I stared at the blueprints on my desk. So somewhere, the paper trail changed. Exactly. Daniel hesitated. I need one more favor. What is it? I'd like you to review the original structural drawings with me tomorrow morning. As a consultant? As someone who notices details other people overlook. I smiled slightly. I'll be there. That evening, Dad knocked on my front door. It was the first time he'd ever visited my house. He stood quietly on the porch, holding a paper bag from my favorite bakery. I wasn't sure if you'd be home. I am. He stepped inside slowly. His eyes moved across the room. The exposed timber ceiling, the handcrafted bookshelves, the staircase, the solid oak dining table. You built all this? I did. He walked over to one of the beams, ran his hand across the smooth wood. It's beautiful. I smiled. Thank you. He looked around for several moments before speaking again. I spent years believing success looked like a bigger paycheck. He turned toward me. I never realized. Sometimes success looks like doing one thing so well that people trust you with their safety. Those words meant more than any apology, because they were honest. As Dad prepared to leave, he stopped beside the front door. I owe you something. You don't owe me anything. I do. I should have asked what you did. I should have visited. I should have listened. I placed a hand on his shoulder. We can't change yesterday. He nodded quietly. No. But maybe we can do better tomorrow. After he left, I watched his truck disappear down Maple Street. For the first time in years, I felt like I hadn't lost my family. I'd simply been waiting for them to finally see me. The following morning, I arrived at the county engineering office. Daniel already had dozens of blueprints spread across a conference table. He pointed to one sheet. I found the first discrepancy. I stepped closer. What is it? He laid 2 drawings side by side. They have the same approval stamp, the same permit number, the same date. I frowned. But they're not the same drawing. Daniel nodded slowly. No, they aren't. Someone, at some point during construction, had replaced an approved structural detail with a different version, and whoever had done it had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure no one noticed. Only one final question remained. Who changed it, and why? Daniel carefully laid both blueprints on the conference table. At first glance, they looked identical. Same address, same permit number, same approval stamp, same engineering seal. But when he placed a transparent overlay across the drawings, one detail immediately stood out. The beam supporting the second-floor balcony wasn't the same. On the approved drawing, a larger laminated structural beam carried the load across 2 support columns. On the second drawing, that beam had been replaced with a smaller one, only 4 inches narrower. To most people, it looked insignificant. To an engineer, it changed everything. Daniel looked at me. How much difference would this make? I studied both drawings for a long moment. Not immediately, but over time, the weight transfers unevenly. He nodded. Exactly. The house wouldn't fail overnight. It would slowly begin telling you something was wrong. The sticking doors, the cracks, the settling balcony. Every piece finally fit together. 3 days later, the county requested one final meeting. Not in a courtroom, not at the construction site, In the Ridgeview Community Center, present were Daniel Brooks, 2 county inspectors, representatives from Vaughn Development, their legal counsel, Olivia and Ethan, my parents, and me. Daniel stood beside a large projector screen. This investigation is complete. The room became silent. We found no evidence that the homeowners knowingly approved structural changes. Olivia quietly closed her eyes. Relief washed across her face. She had carried that fear for days. Then Daniel continued. However, our review confirmed that the framing installed during construction did not fully match the approved engineering specifications. A photograph appeared on the screen. The exposed wall, the undersized beam, then another, the approved plans, then another, the installed materials. Every image matched the report. Every measurement had been verified. Every conclusion had been reviewed independently. Facts. Nothing but facts. A representative from Vaughn Development stood. We accept the findings. The room grew even quieter. He continued. We have agreed to repair every affected home at no cost to the homeowners. Another photograph appeared, then another. Daniel explained that several homes in the same construction phase required preventive structural reinforcement. Most showed only minor movement. None had suffered catastrophic damage. Because the issue had been discovered early, the repairs would be extensive, but they would restore the homes to the approved engineering standard. Ethan slowly stood. I owe everyone an explanation. No one interrupted. When construction fell behind schedule, our project managers approved several material substitutions. He swallowed hard. I believed every change had received proper engineering approval. I signed paperwork, without personally verifying each revision. He looked directly at Olivia. I should have asked more questions. Then he turned toward me, and I should have listened when someone else did. For several moments, nobody spoke. Finally, my mother broke the silence. She wasn't crying, but her voice had changed. Soft, almost uncertain. Claire. I looked at her. She stood slowly. I spent years judging you by things that never mattered. She glanced toward Olivia's repaired blueprints lying on the table. I thought success meant bigger houses, bigger paychecks, newer cars. She shook her head. But today, the person who protected this family was the daughter I never bothered to understand. The room stayed completely still. Those words didn't erase the past, but they acknowledged it. Sometimes, that's where healing begins. Dad walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. I'm proud of you, he smiled. Not because you were right, but because you stayed kind, even when the rest of us weren't. That meant more to me than hearing I had been right. Being right ends an argument. Being respected changes a relationship. Over the following months, construction crews carefully reinforced every affected home. Temporary supports were installed, engineered beams were replaced, connections were rebuilt. Every repair was independently inspected before walls were closed again. When the final inspection was completed, Daniel handed Olivia a new certificate of structural compliance. This house now matches the approved engineering design. She smiled for the first time in weeks. A real fresh start, he nodded. A safe one. One Saturday afternoon, several months later, my family gathered again. This time, not at Olivia's house, at mine. Dad admired the workshop behind the garage. Ethan asked questions about timber framing. Olivia helped prepare lunch. Emma chased butterflies across the backyard. My mother quietly wandered through the house. She stopped in the living room and gently touched one of the exposed wooden beams. You built this yourself? I did. She looked around slowly. I've never actually seen where you live. No. You never came. She lowered her eyes. I'm sorry. I smiled. You're here now. She nodded. then laughed softly. I spent years wishing you owned a bigger house. She looked around one last time. I never realized. I should have wished to understand the one you already had. As the evening sun settled behind the maple trees, everyone gathered on my back porch. There were no speeches, no comparisons, no quiet insults disguised as jokes, just conversation, real conversation. For the first time in years, nobody called me the family failure, not because I had proven them wrong, because they had finally taken the time to see who I had always been. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with anger. Sometimes it arrives with evidence. Sometimes revenge isn't watching someone lose. It's watching the truth quietly replace every false story people once believed. And sometimes, the strongest house isn't the biggest one on the street. It's the one built on honesty from the very beginning. If this story reminded you that quiet people are often underestimated, let me know in the comments. Truth always stands. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me for another original family drama where patience, integrity, and truth have the final word.